Welcome back to the Culture Based Podcast. I'm Dustin. He's Blake. Episode 32, Defining Your Brand. Blake, it's not what you think it is. I know what you think it is.
What do I think it is?
We'll get into it.
Logo happy.
But it's not what you think it is.
Logo happy.
Look, I know you think you know what it is. But I just want to really emphasize.
I don't know.
It's not that.
They think we know that they know that we think they know.
No, I do know.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't. I guess we'll find out.
You may or may not know. They definitely don't know yet. But we're going to get into that.
And we just lost all our viewers.
Yeah. They're like, what is happening? I thought these guys talk about things.
They're just
not talking about, they're just being dumb. Well, we're really good at being dumb. But today we're going to be a little bit smarter because we're going to talk about defining your brand, and it's not what you think it is. So anyway, February 20th, rolling right through this month. Hope y'all had a great Valentine's Day. If you're into that sort of thing, I like to practice love year round, not just one day a year. That's kind of how we roll in our house.
I just like one day a year. That's it.
Really?
Yeah, I'm like, sorry, honey. I told you I loved you last February 14th.
February 14th.
That's all you get.
Yeah.
Obviously,
I used to only do it on like the 15th and be like, ha, you thought you weren't getting love. But yeah. I got love for you.
Lindsay, for the longest time, my wife, Lindsay, she is like, I proposed to Lindsay on Valentine's Day. I thought one of her gifts or one of her love languages was gifts, like number 1 or number 2, right? Mm-hmm. And mine, out of the 5 love languages, is number 6. Okay, like I do not like gifts at all. So we just bought a house, and she texted me the other day. She goes, I got you a house for Valentine's Day. I'll be interested to see what you get me. And I was like, oh, you cannot. And she was like, I'm just kidding. But I was like, now I have anxiety. Thanks.
Yeah. That you're thinking about Valentine's Day. But it's after Valentine's Day now. So hopefully you didn't screw it up. Hopefully you did exactly what was expected of you and nothing more.
Yep. Nothing.
So, right. Yeah. So today we're going to get into brand. Obviously, we're going to talk about what it means to define your brand. And it's, like we said, it's not what you think. Mm-hmm. But before we get into that, I want to remind you at the Culture Base, we're here to help leaders know what they're about, show where they're going, and build a scalable team to help get them there. If you are listening on an audio podcast platform right now, hello there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, depending on when you're listening to this. We are so glad that you're with us. We'd love for you to leave a 5-star rating and review as well. Even if you're only feeling like 4 stars, why not go ahead and throw an extra star in there? Do something kind today for the world. This would be your kind action, right? If you're watching on YouTube, you can see Blake making it rain stars right now. And we were so glad that you're watching there as well. We'd love for you to hit the thumbs up button. Do you have the thing on your computer that does this yet? I don't have it yet. There's a thing where if you hold your thumb up, it'll do a little pop-up thumb up. Do you have that? No.
Is that what it does? I see that thing pop up on Zoom all the time.
I have
I'm just like, who did that? And I'll like stop.
Who did it? Show yourself.
I'm like, who did the thumbs up? I don't know who it was. And everyone's like, nobody did, Blake. They're like, but can we get back to the production report? I'm like, yeah,
I guess. But if I see one more bubble thumb, so help me. Shut this whole meeting down. Oh man. Yeah, I have big FOMO about the bubble thumb and the emoji reactions because I've tried so hard. I've spent time researching how to get it to happen on my computer.
I can't believe this is I am so dumb.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Just an update, and I'm like looking around, and I'm like, who did that?
Who did it?
Like, it wasn't me.
God forbid they do the rock and roll fingers, because then there's like fireworks that come out. I don't know if you've seen that action. That's really distracting. Anyway, We would love for you to give us an actual thumbs up on our YouTube if you're watching along. That's called a like. We'd love for you to like. Also, while you're there, go ahead and subscribe to it. I'm just out here educating people, Blake. I don't know
God,
if you know this is an educational program.
we just have 5 minutes of not content at this
If
point.
you want to
We're
know
just
what a
looking at
thumbs
this.
up is, you want to know what a thumbs up mean? It means like. All right, we'll get to the pound sign later. But for this moment right now, thumbs up means like. I would love for you to thumbs up this if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe, ring the bell so that you're notified every time we go live. If you want to find out more about us, you can follow us along on social media at the Culture Base, BASE. We are on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Love to find you there, connect with you there, find out how we can help you. Speaking of us helping you, you can go to theculturebase.com, click on the free 30-minute strategy session. You get to have a little good old chat, little virtual date with us. We'll talk about all the things going on in your world and your team to help you build that scalable team that you're trying to build. All right. On today's episode, since apparently we wasted the first 5 minutes talking about nonsense, it's my favorite part of the podcast.
Okay,
How dare
sorry.
you? How dare you?
I
Anyway, you know it. You know you love it too.
do.
All right. So, Blake, when we see the golden arches, a swoosh, or an apple with a bite out of it, we instantly know what the organization is, right? Do you know what those are?
Yeah,
McDonald's.
KFC,
We're out here educating.
Macintosh.
Macintosh. Yep. Yep. But immediately after you see those icons, Blake, you have an instant feeling, thought, or an opinion. And in that moment, you have identified what the brand means for you. Your organization is no different, even if you're not KFC, Macintosh, or New Balance. Sorry. So let's take a look today, Blake, at what truly defines your brand. I love this from Tony Hsieh. Tony is the CEO of Zappos, which, if you don't know Zappos, Google it. They're big, big time. But Tony famously says that your culture is your brand. And that's the one thing. If you stop listening 5, 6, 7 minutes into this thing and you're like, what do I need to know today? You need to know that your culture is your brand. It's not a logo. It's not colors. It's not typeface. It is your brand. It is your culture. Is your brand, right? So I want you to understand today, as we're going through this discussion, that when we say brand, the brand is how others feel, right? Because feeling is perception and perception is reality, right? So brand is how others feel by the result of your actions, which defines your culture. I'm actually, you know what? Since we have this technology, Blake, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put this up. If you're watching, this is a reason to watch on YouTube right now, is that I'm going to put this up on the screen. Brand is how others feel by the result of your actions, which defines your culture. I'm going to leave that up here for a little bit so you can write it down. Blake, what does this mean to you?
I don't know. I'm still kind of chewing on this in lifetime because there's an aspect where I get that like your culture is your brand, but I think like your culture when it's healthy and is producing, or when it's not, is producing the outflow of what your brand is, right? Like if brand is how people feel and they respond to when they see this thing, like our culture is whatever your culture is what developed to the point that someone had a feeling, right? Because I think you can have internal culture that somehow never reaches out and has purpose behind it too. So I think it's like where culture and purpose come aligned, that's where you start to have the brand aspect, right? So
that's great.
I totally get what he's saying, but I think it's just I think we could totally mix up culture and brand if we're not careful. So I think where culture and purpose culminate to bring value to someone, that's where brand is.
Yeah, I think if you dug deep into what Tony was saying there, I think that's essentially what he's saying as well. Is just we're trying to shorten it, and so if we're gonna, what we're gonna do today is we're gonna break that down a little bit more into into that DNA, into that purpose. And so we're gonna kind of take this approach. We talk often at the culture base about the steps of going through the culture based process is to clarify, identify, and amplify. Everything that we talk about, we run it through that filter, we run it through that funnel of process. And so when it comes to understanding your purpose, right, Blake, first thing you have to do is to clarify that. And that's an
Mm.
extremely internal thing. It's mostly the leaders, it's mostly the leadership team, it's mostly the ones that are the owners that are kind of calling the shots, the visionaries that are directing where the thing is going to go. Blake, walk through us for a second. What does it mean to clarify this piece of your culture when it comes to your brand and what that means for your team?
Yeah, I think this is where it has everything to do with fully understanding and embracing what you're known for, what you want to be known for. Like how do you by the thing you do, okay? I always go back to electrical because that's what I do, right? Like that's what our team does. But is that what we're bringing people or like what is it that we want them to feel when they come in around what we're providing? Do we want them to feel like, wow, this team who is installing this electrical is top notch because they're bringing a clean install. They're bringing like everything we're going to need to do our job well. They're bringing it, you know,
Yeah.
and they're doing it efficiently and they're courteous and they're, you know, like we want people to feel that they're in the right hands. And so you take that
Right.
idea of people feeling in the right hands and you start breaking it apart. How do we do that with the
Mm,
things we do? Because that's what we want them to feel. We want them to feel like, you know, the term we say is we want them to have the best value for the right price. So whatever the value is they want, like, because sometimes we talk about like, are they asking for a Ferrari in their install or are they asking for a Honda? Well, we want to bring the right value
mhm.
for that price. And so we're constantly, what does that mean? You know, what is the
Yeah.
right value? And I think that's where brand comes in aligned is um, yeah, just starting to break that stuff down. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I want to point out something that Blake was saying in that example of his company, and he went all the way to I might use wrong phrases here, so just interrupt me and correct me if I do. But he went all the way to the technician on the site when he was talking about what he wanted to be known for. Right? He didn't say when I sit at my desk alone in my office. This is what we're going to do to be known for. No, he went all the way down, which is what we're going to get to today. We're going to get to the impact, whether you're B2B or B2C, it doesn't matter what your business is. At the end of the day, you interact with other people. And we're going to begin kind of with that in mind and work our way towards that. And we're going to talk about how to get to that. I want to say one thing too, Blake, about what you're known for. I think too many leaders try to make statements internally and to their team, maybe not even to their customers, but to their team about what they're not going to be.
Mm,
Or here's what we are not. We could make a list a mile long of what we are not. But if you can list what you're for
mm,
in, on the palm of your hand, that's what's going to carry. That's what people are going to remember. And so I think it's very important that that you and your organization focus on what you are for and not what you're against. I really do believe that that begins to take place, begins to clarify, right? Begins to clarify what our culture really is, which we know leads to what our brand and reputation is in the community and in the industry.
yeah. You know, before we hopped on here, we were talking about like what's the difference between brand and values, right? And
Mhm.
um, obviously, values are those things you believe. You know, brands how you want someone to feel based off of that, right? And so,
Yeah.
part of this though means you do have to understand your values at a whole nother level, right? So it isn't just like your oh yeah, you know, we believe in excellence. Like that's great. But like really honing in on what that looks like, how that's going to impact them, right? And so um as you're coming up with these values, you know, Traction EOS talks a lot about this the people analyzer and identifying what your values are and how they fit and what are the most important values and how you want people to feel. And so I do think it's important to see, like, Dustin talked about this, the what part is already part of you, and
Mm,
it's clarifying those things, like what is already who we are, instead of just getting to aspirational values, like,
yeah.
well, we just want to be Chick-fil-A. Like, that's
Mhm,
great, but Chick-fil-A is Chick-fil-A. Don't try to be Chick-fil-A. Be whoever you
exactly.
are. You can aspire to aspects of, like, we need to up our game so that people see our brand and feel this way or think this way, but not in a sense of like, we are always on time and then you're never on time. Like, that's just an easy way for you to get mocked and show hypocrisy of who you are. And so, in this process of clarifying, it's really important to bring your team in too. Okay,
Yeah.
because especially the leader of the organization, I think maybe has one of the most murky views,
Mhm.
unfortunately, of where things are, except at the top, because they
Yeah.
don't understand how this is playing out. And even though they can say, hey, we're about excellence, and they don't help their team understand what that means and define that, then all of a sudden someone sees excellence as being high profit. And they broke that high profit down into going and, like, charging way higher or not using certain expenses or lying or cheating, and that's not how you get to that excellence. So if you don't define these things clearly, the how it looks later on looks quite different.
Yeah, I love that we always pick on excellence just because it's the most vague of all of them. It's really clarifying that is the strategy, right, Blake? And we're going to get into now how to identify it with your team. So you've kind of clarified, you kind of removed, you kind of chiseled away a little bit at the rock until you kind of just revealed the diamond, if you will. And you say, now this is what's left. This is who we are. You've clarified that, right? And now we're going to identify it with your team. And there's some super easy practical steps that you can take to help identify your culture, which is your brand, uh, to kind of help carry it forward. Really internally first, and then we're going to talk about getting it to the customer or the other business that you may work with. Um, Listen, icons and short phrases, we talked about values and things like that. Those are all really great. The more concise and clear and simple you can keep them. Edit, edit, edit. I see so many times people with these values or culture icons or phrases, and there's 12 of them. And I go, no one's ever going to remember that. Like the very select few nerds may remember it, and it's because they posted it as their desktop wallpaper
Mhm.
and they're trying to be teacher's pet. It's not memorable. It's just memorization at that point. It doesn't carry any weight forward. It's just words.
Yeah.
So short phrases and simple icons will carry the weight. If you're watching on YouTube right now, you can see an icon of the culture base. You can see that there's a little bit of a tent, kind of a building structure right there of what we are building, and you can see the three little levels inside of that. That's what we kind of refer to as our clarify, identify, amplify. It's simple, and I can take that and draw it on a napkin, and I can explain it to anyone at anywhere at any time. It's over. It's done. Took 30 seconds or less. That's what you need. So bring visuals in to that which you want to be repeated, and it will lead to all experiencing your brand. Don't overdo it. Simplify, simplify, simplify. What do you think about that, Blake?
Yeah. So when it comes to visuals, especially, I think we got to be so careful not careful. We have to be very intentional with
There it is.
what we're showing. We have to be so intentional because how many icons are on this right now, on this visual? There's just one, because we're saying there's only one thing that's important that we're talking about right now.
Mhm.
The other extreme is that people end up um, running into this idea that everything needs to be plastered on a wall. Well, if everything's getting icons and visuals, nothing is important. You really want to focus on what is the most important things that are going to lead to a good customer experience, right? Because that's what we're talking about. Identify here is all about what is the experience that your internal customer, your team gets, the external customer, those receiving your service or your goods, right? and in the community. Like thinking through those aspects becomes so important to make sure we're only going to really amplify, and we'll talk about that later, but really amplify this stuff to the most important aspects. Okay. So you got to be careful not to overdo it. Um, so the big question is like, how do you present yourself? Okay. Because I think this is a thing that um, we may not believe, but I do think it's important to say is that brand is not absolute.
Hmm.
Okay. Brand is not absolute, which means that you have the ability to change that thing. And the way your brand is known and what it's known for is based off of other people's thoughts, perceptions, perspectives. But it's also that their thoughts, perceptions, perspectives times quantity, times mass belief, right? And so what that means is if you're wanting to present yourself a certain way and you want them to feel a certain way, you want a certain value to come to them, then that needs to happen repetitively. And it needs to happen over and over. And then I'm about to drop the sexiest word in business history. The only way to get that is through process and through processing and having your brand embedded in all of that process for the most important things. Have process for everything, but really exfoliate and bring out process to its brand level process by first taking this idea of like, hey, this process right here is the most important. And we're going to have a course, we're going to have a process, we're going to have a checklist, and we'll talk about that more. But we're going to have a visual because that's the most important thing to really hit the hearts of who we're trying to hit.
Right. Yeah. So your words, your apparel, your
Yeah,
facial expressions, taking control of the process, all how you present yourself is what Blake is saying here.
absolutely.
That's where the brand, you hear the phrase brand identity. That's where brand identity comes from. It's not in a spreadsheet. It's not on a fancy PDF. Those are great guidelines, right? There are brand identity guidelines that should exist for your company.
Yeah.
But these, at the end of the day, your brand, your actual brand identity comes from how you present yourself. And that's what we mean by how to identify it
Yeah.
with your team. Anything
Right.
there, Blake, before we move on to Amplify?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly the fact of like Chick-fil-A. Like we're talking about a fast food restaurant. If I came to a group of people and I said, "Tell me like what's your experience in the fast food world?" People might not immediately think of Chick-fil-A. They'll probably think of McDonald's or someone else like that
Yeah.
because we said, "Tell me about the fast food industry." But when I say think about Chick-fil-A, that changes mentality. Like to exactly what Dustin was saying, their words, what they say in response to people, my pleasure, like the fact that we know that is because they've embedded that in their
Yep.
apparel, how they look, their facial expressions, they're smiling. Uh, they're taking control of the whole process.
Yep.
They let you know where you're going next. Hey, thanks so much. Go right up here to John. He's going to take your payment. Hey, next,
Yep.
go up here. They own it, and
They're
it's
not leaving it to interpretation.
not at all. And they're fast food. So if I would have asked you fast food, you would have had a perspective. But as soon as I bring them out, they're an elite fast food, right? I don't
Yeah.
even know if
Yeah.
people would call them that, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah. It is hard to identify when you originally think of fast food. It's hard to categorize Chick-fil-A in that same category. But I think the intentionality of not leaving your identity up for interpretation is probably your biggest takeaway here in this identify section. Don't leave it up for interpretation.
Good.
Define, define, define. All right, let's get into how do we amplify this. This could be to our, now that we've kind of gotten it internally, we've gotten it to our team. How do we amplify it to our customers? Again, whether it's B2B or B2C, at the end of the day, we're all relating with external people outside of our company, which is where we started, right? When Blake was talking about the techs on site, they're courteous, they're on time, they're professional, right? You begin with that end in mind. And so now we're there, right? We're at the point where the rubber hits the road, how we amplify our brand identity, which is our culture, to our customers. I think the very first thing I would say, Blake, before I turn it back over to you, is that I would highly, highly encourage, this is like a super pet peeve of mine, stick to your strengths. Do not be a coffee shop that sells pizza. Don't do it. Stick to your strengths. Don't try to be something that you're not. I chuckle every time I get a sausage like breakfast sandwich from Chick-fil-A because I'm like, what am I doing? I'm at a chicken restaurant.
Yeah, right.
Or you know Burger King's number one seller of all time? Their chicken sandwich. Did you
No
know that?
way.
100%. Look it up.
That's crazy.
And it's nuts. It's like you're telling me the
Ugh.
king of burgers is more known for their chicken sandwich than they are for burgers. That's how you create confusion in the
Yeah,
marketplace. And ask and just I'm not going to ask you to answer this out loud, but if you were watching and listening, which company would you say is more successful right now, Chick-fil-A or Burger King?
right.
You know
Yep.
the answer.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
So stick to your strengths. Don't try to be something that you're not. You don't have to be an expert at everything. You can be really good at one thing.
Yep. I think I don't eat a lot of White Castle, but I respect the fact that they're like, we know who we are.
Yeah.
We're here.
Yeah, we're out here for a certain clientele.
Of course, we're going to be open at 1 a.m. We got you.
That's our highest like influx of customers. That's peak
Right.
hours,
Yeah.
right?
So kind of getting back to Amplify, and I hinted at this a little, but I do want to expound this. The idea of creating process around the most important things. This process, and I do believe greatly, the process needs to be around everything, right? I do believe it needs to be around every aspect of your business. But there are some that really need the course, the process, the checklist, the visual. Okay. Those four components, I think, have to be a part of these processes. One, the course, the videos, like, and we're in such an age that we can do this so easily. Create video-based stuff that is training people what you mean by excellence, what you mean by go from this point to this point, what it looks like, how you go about it, how fast, what's the pace. You're building that kind of stuff. Then you have a written process. You're showing, hey, step 1, step 2, step 3. Because again, not everyone's the same learner, and so having that written out process with links and connecting videos and stuff, that's great. You can do all this in the G Suite here of Google, where everything's free. So don't be like, I just don't have the resources. There are so many free, cheap resources that there's just no excuse anymore. Okay. And the biggest thing to process is that it's available, and you can make it very available on those kind of platforms. The next one's the checklist. So after someone already understands the process, they understand the course, having that visual checklist that they just visually, as they're about to execute the final thing, they're just, yep. Oop, forgot that. Let's throw that in here. You don't think that's important. This is why surgeons have checklists, because they don't just go off their gut on whether they're doing it right. They go through, this is how things get left inside people. Okay. This is why they started coming up with checklists for surgeons, because people were like, yeah, we left that in you. And we're gonna have to cut you back open. Sorry about that. I feel like we'll do it for free. I promise. But this is why we have checklists of these kind of things. And then the last one's just the visual. Okay, this isn't the checklist. It just visually shows the process somehow in play, or key part of it, visually showing, here's how it goes. That way, when you look, just like Dustin was saying early on, when you look, what you're seeing is this visual understanding of a bigger thing. Okay, it's just a tripwire into, I'm getting my subconscious and my conscious back on what it needs to be on. What you got, Dustin?
That's right. Yeah, just to wrap up the Amplify section, it's a good idea to constantly filter your public decisions through the work that you've done before. Those are good guardrails to keep you in check. It's the reason that brand identity guidelines exist, and it's the reason that really good brand identity guidelines aren't just colors, logos, and typefaces. It's words. It's this, not that. It's phrases. It's here's how we dress. Here's how we interact with people. Here's how we show courtesy. Here's how we execute our values. All of those things should be a part of your brand identity guidelines. So, in closing, I want to give you a couple of next steps. We talked about the clarify, identify, amplify. There's strategy, there's logistics, and there's distribution to be able to help you take some next steps here. So if your next step is I haven't started this at all, I would encourage you get off site with your leadership team for a brand eval sooner than later, more regularly. Would be great. I would say quarterly is really good, just to make sure that, again, those guardrails are in place. How we doing, realign. The logistics of it, if you're like, okay, I've already done that, next thing is you need to create this process of rolling out your brand identity internally to your team, right? Get everybody on board with how we're going to do this thing. And then from there, you're going to distribute this brand, right? You're going to stay consistent in your language. You're going to communicate more than you feel like you need to. And the ways that you can communicate, Blake just went through: course, a written process, checklists, and non-negotiable visuals. We live in a society of visual learners and visual memorization, whether you want to recognize it or not. This is the world we live in. So stick to it. Blake, anything else?
We can help you with this. This is an area where I know people feel overwhelmed. Let me tell you, it's not as big of a monster as you think it is, but it's always good to get people outside of your organization asking the right questions and getting unbiased perspectives. Okay. This is where I would say reach out to people to help you with brand identity and coming up with your brand solution and how you're going to go about everything you do, i.e. the culture base.
Yeah, I love it. That's great. We're so excited to have spent this time with you. I hope this is a conversation starter for you and your team. And we would love to carry on that conversation with you, just as Blake was saying. So go to theculturebase.com. Let's have a free 30-minute strategy session about this and how we can help roll this thing out appropriately with you and your team. We will be back next week for episode 33, in which we're going to continue this conversation about culture, because we're the culture base, right? We're going to talk about building a culture of feedback and how important that is. Cannot wait to be with you then. We'll talk to you next time on Culture Base Podcast.